Okay, we are now ready to begin. First thing we're going to do is look at something called the elements of design. Elements and principles of design. And there should be a handout that everybody should have, and it'll be posted online. These are something that's really very important when we analyze art. We don't necessarily need to memorize these, but we need to know why they are important to art. And most of the time they call them the elements and principles of design, although they could very easily be called elements and principles of art. But we're going to run with the official title. So I'm going to probably have some of you guys do some reading for me because I'm starting to lose my voice. I haven't talked this much all summer. So here we go. Elements of design are sensory. That means that we can see them. We can't hear them because, of course, art or our type of art is a visual art. So, of course, we've got line, value, texture, color. You should have a handout that gives you all of these as well as the definition, but by all means take notes so that you can remember. So all of these are things that we can see. Okay, so line. Line can be considered in two ways. A linear mark made by a pen or a brush, or the edge created where two shapes meet. The third thing that I want you to think about is that in the three-dimensional world, lines do not exist. Even if you draw on a piece of paper a line, that is actually a tiny buildup of graphite. So in three-dimensional terms, we don't have lines. We just have the edges where various shapes are. And in order to make something look three-dimensional on a two-dimensional surface, which is what visual artists do unless they're a sculptor or an architect, you have to use lines. So, you know, when you're laying awake at night worrying about things, you can put yourself to sleep by pondering the fact that a line does not exist in the 3D world. So there you go. That'll put you to sleep if nothing else will. So here we've got some examples of lines. This is one of your images that you need to know. This is from Lascaux, and it is the Hall of Bulls. Charcoal and various clays and dirt that had color in them were used to make this. So because everything's outlined, it is considered to be linear. Here as well, we have not only lines, but we have pretty much a progression going the same direction. And so some people will talk about how the line of the painting is moving the eye in that direction. So line is very important. This is another really good example of line. This is Rembrandt. He did lots and lots and lots of self-portraits. This is a portrait of his wife, Saskia, as well as himself. Now, these lines are not linear in the sense he's got some hatching that's very much, you know, with lines that are parallel to one another. But you notice, especially when he's doing the hair, that he's using lines in a very convoluted manner to curve his very curly hair. So line can tell us a lot about texture, a lot about the direction that the eye is going, and it also shows us value, which I think will be coming up as our next one. This is another example of line. This is the spiral jetty from, this is the global, it's the abstract for the global contemporary painting. And then you can see we have a very linear feel to this Renaissance building that you would find in Florence. So line is very important. So then we go to value. Let's get somebody to read this. Where's my seating chart? Okay, Max, go ahead and read the definitions, the three definitions of value.
Value is the lightness or darkness of a tone or color. High key refers to an artwork that has mainly light values in it. Low key refers to a scheme that is mostly dark values in it. High contrast has few middle tones in it, while low contrast means that the artwork has mainly dark and middle tones.
Okay, so value. And I'd never heard this phrase before, but I was talking to another artist and they said, color gets all the credit, but value does all the work. So if you ever were to take my painting class, you would understand that as much as I love color, value is still more important, because when you're working with a three-dimensional piece of artwork and you want to show form or contour, you have to do it by making it light or dark or changing the color. So value is very important. So, you know, there's great value to this class, but value also means light to dark. So here we have a really good example from the Global Contemporary. This is various dilutions of India ink that has been put down on paper. This is called The Trees, and as you can see, it's quite abstract. We'll be studying it a little bit later. But you can see that the value, this is largely dominantly dark with some middle grays and then whites in it. So this artist was not that interested in color for this painting. They were interested in exploring the values or the lights and darks. Then we have two other really good examples. This one is a Chinese painting on silk, and you can see how these mountains are very dark at the top, but they fade out, and then we have another layer that pops forward. This is a type of atmospheric perspective, and we'll be talking about it more later. This is a beautiful piece done by, Maria, what's her last name? I can remember her first name because it's mine. Anyways, this is Hopi Indian art, and it's part of the Indigenous Americas. And you can see that the whole thing is black, but they have gone ahead and buffed certain areas so that it's very shiny, and the rest is matte. And so what happens is depending on, you know, how reflective a surface is, you will get differences in value, even if in reality it's the same black over the whole thing. Okay, Caravaggio, wonderful Baroque artist. We'll be studying this painting a little bit. You can see the high contrast. You know, some people call it Rembrandt light, but Caravaggio actually did it before Rembrandt did, where it's almost like stage lighting, where we've got very dark things with then very bright light highlighting certain things in it. So this would be considered a very contrasty painting. In other words, there's lots of light, lots of dark, not a whole lot of middle tones. And, you know, you see that a lot with photography, is when you take a picture of something, our cameras on our phones tend to push it either dark or light and don't capture the middle tones necessarily. Now we're moving on to texture. Let's see here. Kevin, let's go ahead and have you tell us what texture is.
The feel, appearance, or consistency of a surface or substance. Texture is the surface quality of a shape. Rough, smooth, soft, hard, glossy, etc. Texture can be physical, tactile, or visual.
Okay, so there's two ways that you can see texture. I don't know if you've been to the Crocker Art Museum. We will be going there on a field trip probably in October. They have some amazing pieces in there in their modern abstract section that have got layer upon layer of paint just wadded on there. That is actually tactile or physical texture. And then there's visual texture, where an artist will go ahead and paint something so that they're inferring that texture. So here we've got two examples of texture. We've got you know, the very smooth surface, so this is tactile. This is a surrealistic piece that you'll be studying a little bit later. It's a teacup and saucer with spoon, and it's covered in fur. Some people think that the artist did it as a joke, but it does definitely mess with our heads because we're used to thinking of things that we eat with being very smooth. And here we've got something that's not only porous, but it's fuzzy. And here's another example of tactile texture. This is the Bayeux tapestry. You can see the thread and the embroidery. Here's more texture, and that's all tactile. And we didn't ever get to, I didn't ever show you an example of texture that is done by the artist. Silly me. But you get what I'm talking about. You've all seen the still lifes where you've got the smooth apple in it, and then you have, you know, maybe some flowers that, and they infer the texture of the center of the flower. Okay, moving on to color. Let's go ahead and get one of the ladies to do this for us. Claire.
Also known as chroma or hue, colors to the visible part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Primary colors are blue, yellow, and red. Secondary colors are made by mixing the primary colors and are violet, green, and orange.
All right, so this is, physics coming in and helping us with our, obviously, the visible spectrum. Beyond it is infrared on one end and ultraviolet on the other. Ultraviolet was very cool in my day because everybody had black lights and certain colors and certain, pigments and textures would glow in the dark. So, we were all tripping out. That shows you just how old I am. Anyways, important to understand that primary colors cannot be made. I mean, yes, synthetically they can be made. However, violet, green, and orange are made by mixing two primary colors. That's something you should have known by first grade. A lot of times people don't know it. Okay, so then we have something called color schemes. Artists choose various combinations that help express certain themes, temperatures, emotions, or ideas. Some of the most common combinations use complementary or analogous color schemes. So if we have a color wheel, see how well I can do this. Say we've got red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and violet. Things that are opposite each other on the color wheel are complementary. And Van Gogh did a lot of that. Things that are analogous, like if you were going to do a sunset, you would probably want to use a value scheme, a color scheme that involved red, orange, and yellow, because you want to capture those colors, and they're next to each other on the color wheel. So here we've got a couple of examples. We have a copy of a Greek archaic statue that, when it was first done, the one that we actually have is made out of marble, and there's remnants of color left on it, but this is a replica. And then we've got this painting by Matisse, and you can see that we've got the reds and the greens, so it's pretty much predominantly a complementary color scheme, because we've got, the reds, and then the pink would be a form of red, and then this red, and then all the greens, and even this blue is kind of bluish green. So important to understand that the combination of colors that an artist uses is a very intentional choice that they make. You can see here, very intentional choice. This was in Central Park. I think it's the example for the snapshot. But you can see it was put up for 2 weeks in February. In New York, in Central Park in February, there's no leaves. There's hardly anything that's even green. And you have the saffron colored or orange flags. Okay, shape is pretty self-contained and defined area of geometric or organic shape, form. So a positive shape in a painting automatically creates a negative shape. So you can see in architecture that shapes make a huge difference. Notice the repeated shapes in this mosque. And obviously a mosque will always have minarets. This is part of our global contemporary, one of my favorite art pieces. This guy had 150 million sunflower seeds made out of porcelain. And then, of course, this is the Colosseum in Rome. But shape is very important, and it creates negative shapes. So those windows that you can see in the Colosseum are a negative shape. We have a couple other examples of shape. Some black and red ware. It's Greek, and then this is one of our images for this unit, which is the Camelid Sacrum. Okay, let's get somebody else to read. Mary.
All lines have direction, horizontal, vertical, or oblique. Horizontal suggests calmness, stability, and tranquility. Vertical gives a feeling of balance, formality, and alertness. Oblique suggests movement and action.
Okay, good. So you can see here, we have a very famous painting. Probably everybody knows who did. How many of you do not know the artist that painted this? And you don't have to raise your hand to be embarrassed, but don't be embarrassed. Vincent van Gogh, notice what he's done, and this is a really good example of actual tactile. Does somebody want to shut that door? I'm not sure what's going on out there. Thank you. So this is a really good example of both tactile texture as well as texture that he is inferring. So if you were to see this close up, you would see that there's big blobs of paint, and you can see the actual surface and how he built up his paint. However, he's also inferring the textures in this cypress tree. But back to the original thing, line. So we've got a really strong horizontal line, but we have all these swirling spirals. What do you think he was trying to express in this? Movement. Excellent. So lines are very powerful, and direction is very powerful. And Van Gogh is one of my favorites. Once again, you can see direction happening here. Not as obvious in this particular statue, except the fact that, hey, that pointing arm, it's definitely showing direction. You know, even more so than here. The Bayeux tapestry reads from left to right. And so it's definitely got a direction to it, and it is very much of a horizontal narrative. So direction is an important thing. And then size and scale. You can see here, it's one of the paintings we'll be studying, that we've got these hunters here, and they're pretty big. But we also see human figures down here. They're very small. That helps create the illusion that we're sitting on this hill with the hunters, and we're looking down at the valley below. The scale or size and the relationship between the two is very important. Here we've got another example. This is a Japanese, very famous Japanese garden. And depending on where you took the picture, these could look like the ocean with islands in it. But with these people in it, you know the scale on that is very small. So usually if an artist wants to show something grandiose in a painting, they will go ahead and put a human being in it very small so that you can understand the scale. Another example, here we've got an actual portrait. And, you know, it's more or less close up. Then we have this, which is a very famous Rococo piece. And there are lots of figures in it, but we also know that it is small compared to the tree. So size and scale, very, very important. Then we move on to principles of design, and that has more to do with how the painting is organized. Kendall, you want to go ahead and read that for us?
Sure. Balance in design is similar to balance in physical. A large shape was specific. Oh, this is a large shape close to the center can be balanced by a small close to the edge.
I thought this is so amusing.
They're just laughing at me. I can barely see the board.
Oh, well, you may need to sit closer.
Oh no, it's all good. A large light tone shape will be balanced by a small dark tone shape. The darker shape, the heavier it appears to be.
Okay, so how many of you guys have ever been on a teeter-totter when you were small and you've got a parent that's with you? And in order to get it to balance, the adult may be right there and you may be right there. So balance, an important part of art. So first of all, we have something that's called symmetry. When you look at your face every morning when you get up, you're looking at something symmetrical. One side is exactly like the other, except it's mirrored. Obviously, as you grow old, the symmetry ends. I am so ticked off that the sagging in my face and even the wrinkles are not symmetrical. It's just not fair. So, you know, I'm trying to be symmetrical and it's really tough. So you'll notice here, that whatever is happening on one side here happens on the other side in that piece of architecture. What's happening here, it's not entirely symmetrical because of the way the arms are going, but you can pretty much surmise that this arm coming from this side will do the same thing that that does. So symmetry, that's where you got balance, equal balance. Here's asymmetrical balance. These are two pieces that you'll be studying in just a little while. And you can see that this is balance, but this is a much heavier weight in the piece of art. This is a painting by Vermeer. You can see that she pretty much is the dominant figure there, and there are other things that help balance this out, but it's more on the lines of the teeter-totter. Then another good example of asymmetrical balance. We've already talked about this Frank Lloyd Wright building, and we'll probably talk about it some more. This is somewhat symmetrical, at least as far as the architectural features in here, but it's asymmetrical in the fact that all of these figures are not balancing each other out as much. But on the whole, one would consider that symmetrical. So now we move on to gradation. And, is that Gabriella?
Mhm.
Okay.
So gradation of size and direction produce linear perspective. Gradation of color from warm to cool and tone from dark to light produce aerial perspective. Gradation can add interest and movement to a shape. A gradation from dark to light will cause the eye to move along.
Okay, so when we're talking about a gradient, it is how things are in sequence. So your grade in this class is basically on a gradient, A, B, C, D, F. When you're talking about value, you're talking from light to dark. So that when you're talking about a middle value, it's on the middle part of the value scale. So you can see here, painting by Cezanne, considered to be a post-impressionist. I really like his work, but you can see that it's not necessarily totally representational. But what is interesting is if you squint at it, there's really no change of value going back, but there is a change in color. So you're moving from fairly warm colors here to cooler colors. And as things move away from us, they tend to cool off. Part of that is because yellow light waves are shorter than other, the blues and the reds. And so they tend to drop off sooner. But I'll let Mr. Purnett explain that to you. Here we've got, another example of gradation and how value really changes things. We've got lots going on in this painting. We'll study it more, but you can see that the action is really here. And then these people are probably in the middle ground, along with the artist. And then the guy in the back would be further back, and we're doing it with value. So things that go back in this painting are getting darker. Okay, repetition. Olivia?
Repetition with variation is interesting. Without variation, repetition can become
Monotonous.
monotonous. Example, a group of shapes that are all the same. They can be taken in and understood with a single glance. When variation is introduced, the shapes, although similar, are much more interesting to look at. They can no longer be absorbed properly with a single glance. The individual character of each shape needs to be considered.
Okay, so let's see what we've got here. All right, this is from the Great Mosque of Cordoba, and you can see that we have repetition, but within the repetition we have two heights of the arch, and they're also going in other directions. So that makes for a very interesting view. I want to go and see this. If we can get enough people together, we could go to Europe and do an art history tour. Okay, here we've got repetition. This is done by Andy Warhol, and this is Marilyn Monroe. You can see that her face is repeated, but because it varies, there's not much variation in here, although you can see that there is some. But as it moves out here, they start varying, and that makes for a much more interesting piece of art. And here's another good example of certain shapes being repeated. This is by Gustav Klimt. He is an Austrian artist, and you can see that he uses a lot of rectangles, and he makes an actual pattern. You have circles here as well as circles there. But he is varying the size as well as the color, and that gives it a lot of variety.
Is that a painting?
You can see there's gold leaf on it as well. So you can see he's very realistically painted the face and the arm, and everything else has been abstracted. I don't know if any of you have seen the movie called The Woman in Gold. Fabulous movie about a woman whose family owned quite a few Gustav Klimts, and they were taken away during the war because they were Jewish, and how this one woman fought to get her family's paintings back. It's pretty amazing. All right, this is an example of repetition with variety. This is Inca textiles from indigenous Americas. So the Incas did some amazing things besides Machu Picchu. What's interesting about this is that they value their textiles more than gold. And yet one of their shrines that was, taken apart by the Spaniards yielded, I don't know how many tons of gold. And we're talking tons of gold. And of course, the Spaniards took those all away. They weren't as interested in the textiles. Okay, contrast. Who have we not called on? Jack.
Contrast is a juxtaposition of opposing elements. Opposite colors on the color wheel. Red, green, blue, orange, etc. Contrast in tone or value. Light, dark. Contrast in direction. Horizontal, vertical.
Okay, contrast. So you can see there is lots of contrast here because we don't have a whole lot of middle tones. This is another example of global contemporary artwork. And you can see that he's using fairly flat color, and there is a lot of contrast between the shapes and the lettering, in addition to the light and dark pattern. Another example of contrast, working with fire and water. Those are natural pairings for being opposites. And then we have other examples of contrast where we have the smooth floor, and then we have that crack down the middle. And then the other one is from Indigenous Americas, and this is a European who has married a native woman and produced I think it's called mestizo, a mixed race child, or two of them actually. All right, harmony, we're getting there, guys, we're getting there. Okay, Brian.
Harmony in painting is the visually satisfying effect of combining similar related elements. Adjacent colors on the color wheel, similar shapes, etc.
Okay, so let's take a look at harmony. So here we have another global contemporary piece, but there's a lot of harmony in this because of the mixing of the two colors. And she would go ahead and pour her acrylics and move the canvas around. Frankenthaler is the artist. But you can see there's quite a bit of harmony in that, just because it's cooler colors, and they kind of blend together, and there's no real jagged or straight edges. Here we have another example of harmony having to do with, this is Akhenaten and his wife Nefertiti, and their two children. And the harmony here has more to do with just the overall feeling of the piece, as well as obviously the style is very unique compared to other Egyptian works. Come to something that's really important that you really understand is the golden mean. It's still used today. Have any of you taken photography and understand the rule of thirds? You've kind of heard of it. So basically it is roughly a ratio of 2 to 3. Another way you can think about it is something called the Fibonacci sequence. Anybody has heard of that? I have a wonderful video I'll have to show you guys where you start with numbers and you add them together. And that is also how you get, you know, the Nautilus shell curve. And it's pretty interesting. The Greeks were the first ones to really notice the golden mean. Most of the time when you're doing a painting, you want to go ahead and put your focal point in one of the intersections when you divide up your rectangle in thirds. So you'd want your main focus of the painting to be in one of these intersections. So the golden mean, the rule of thirds, and the Fibonacci sequence all are related as far as proportion and how that works out, and that causes a lot of harmony. Dominance. Okay, Mark, there you go.
Dominance gives a artwork interest, counteracting confusion and monotony. Dominance can be applied to one or more of the elements to give emphasis.
You can see we already talked about how when you're doing a painting and you want to stick with the rule of thirds, or you're taking a photo, you want to go ahead and make the dominant thing in there work with that rule of thirds. And if you were to take a painting class, we would talk about, you know, the importance of composition and what is going to be your dominant element. So which do you think is the dominant element in this painting? Excellent. Why do you think you see that as being dominant? Yeah, so the red is a good clue.
It's above everyone.
He is above everyone, so we've got the height factor.
You put up.
Yeah. And yeah, the way he's looking, this guy is kind of almost facing off. Everybody else is either looking at him or this. So yes, so artists plan their paintings. Amazing thing, huh? Obviously, this is Mondrian. He is sort of the godfather of graphic design, and most of his work is done in a grid, and obviously the dominant element there is red. This is the Kaaba. This is in Mecca. It's the most holy place for Islam. Obviously, the dominant element is this fabric-covered building, and how they circumambulate or walk around it during Ramadan. So everything else is pretty white. Mostly they're wearing white, but we have a very dominant shape there despite the skyline behind it. We're almost done. Okay. Who have I not? Brendan.
Relating the design elements to the idea of being expressed in a painting reinforces the principle of unity, i.e. a painting with an active, aggressive subject would work better with a dominant oblique direction, coarse, rough texture, angular lines, etc. Whereas a quiet, passive subject would benefit from horizontal lines, soft texture, and less tonal contrast. Unity in a painting also refers to the visual linking of various elements of the work.
Okay, so unity is important, and sometimes artists will go ahead and you know, break that rule to make a point. So we've got quite a bit of unity here. Any of you have seen Indiana Jones and the Holy Grail? Have seen this? I've been there. It actually goes up back only about 60 feet. It's in a place called Petra, but you can see it's got quite a bit of unity. They've used various elements from classical Greece, even though they're not in Greece, but it's very unified because they have triangular shapes and pediments. They have the columns. So it is very unified, and it was carved out of the rock there. Okay, so what do you think helps unify this painting? Because we're looking at a lot of stuff. The lines. So you'll notice that even though we've got some radiating lines, these arced and rounded lines, they kind of, the artist is using it to kind of enclose it so that your eye is not being led off the page. It's like a what? It's called stadia. So you could easily say that they were thinking about a stadium, perhaps.
Yeah.
You know, all the flags up at the top and then the stadium down below. This is one place I've got to go before I die. These are the terracotta soldiers. You can find them in China. We'll be studying them a lot more What's interesting is that these were each made by hand. No two are alike. But you can see that there's a lot of similarities to them. So that creates great unity because their heights may vary a little bit, but, and at one time they were also painted. Unfortunately, when they dig them up, within a few hours, the shellac and the paint that was used to paint them basically cracks and peels off. So they're trying to figure out how to stabilize the paint so that when they dig up the rest of them, we can actually see what they look like painted. Here's a lot of unity. We will be studying this as well. Anybody know who this Indian goddess is? Huh? Nobody? No, it's not Medusa. This is actually from India. It's an Asian god. I'm blanking on it too, so. In case you were worried, I just totally blanked on it. Okay, so we will need to do one more thing, where we do formal analysis. So, and because we've got the camera rolling, I'm going to go ahead and keep going. So, how are you guys doing? You ready to fall apart? You ready to sleep?
Yeah.
Let's take it now.
Yeah, hey, I'm right there with you. All right, let's take a look at formal analysis. It's not going to be as long. Okay, so formal analysis is when we look at a painting and we kind of sort it out. And we use the form function, content, and context to help us do that. So this should hopefully give you a little bit more undergirding, as it were, for your snapshots. Yes. So you need some scratch paper. I think I put some on pages. You can draw on the back of this and get dusted. It's your vocabulary. Okay, let's get somebody to read this, since once again my voice is giving out. Teresa, is that how you say it? Do you want to go ahead and read this for us?
Yeah. A formal analysis is quite simply an analysis of the forms utilized in the work of art. It is a close inspection of the artist's use of the elements and principles of art and design. The formal analysis moves beyond simple description in that it connects the elements of the work to the effects they have on the viewer.
Okay, so do a small sketch of this. Basically, what I would recommend you do, for those of you who barely passed Art 1, if you took it. Of course, you don't have to take Art 1 because this will more. Yes.
I'm wondering after this would be a time to look at our snapshots.
We'll see if we can get there. We got lots of stuff to cover. So, all right. So if I were doing a small sketch of this, I would look at it and I would say, okay, it's kind of more of a square painting than, you know, a horizontal or a vertical. What else do you see? You've got this main figure here. You don't have to draw the main figure any more complexly than that. And then you have some other elements that are here. And then we have another element here. And then we have a bunch more things happening here with something happening back there. So the first thing you're going to notice, and so you guys get to discuss this. We'll probably go back and discuss it. So let's just talk a little bit about this and how we would analyze it, and then I can turn off the camera. What is the first shape that you see here if you see all of these masked together?
The center one.
Yeah. So what do you see here? Triangle. Yeah. So a lot of times people don't realize that artists think about what they want to do with the scene. And in this case, the artist wanted to have Lady Liberty front and center, naked from the waist up. That's going to catch the guy's eyes, no kidding. And then we've got other things that are happening back here. And creating this very strong compositional shape really helps sell the painting. And so you really want to take a look at that. So we can look at it. Its form is that it's an oil painting, that it's on canvas. Its function was propaganda. You know, they were trying to show that the people were more important. The content would be actually describing what's in here. So we've got, you know, someone who looks more like the worker. This person with his top hat may be more aristocratic or higher, you know, an aristocrat that's a little bit higher up. Then, of course, we have Liberty with her flag. And then we have even a child or a young adult who is coming along for the ride. And you also see the people who have sacrificed their lives for liberty. So that's the content. Context is, this was after, I think it was done after the French Revolution, before they went to, they had Napoleon for a while, and then they went on to reintroduce the aristocracy for, or the royals for a little while before they then became a democracy. So interesting story, backstory on this, we'll learn more about it. But that's kind of how you would look at a painting and say, okay, what are the FFCCs? You know, what are we looking at here? You know, so you want to take a look at the fact that when we were talking about form or shape and the principles and elements of design, so we've noticed that. We could also say that we've got high contrast going on here, where we've got lots of dark in here, less light in the back. And then you can look at all sorts of things from the elements and the principles of design that help you understand the painting. But the most important thing is to understand the form, the function, the content, and the context. Is that making sense to you guys? Yeah. I'm gonna go ahead and turn the camera off, and we'll go ahead and look at some other ones, but I'm not gonna keep the online people. They will go ahead and finish the exercise on their own.